A lot of companies will be using static analysis. That runs an analysis on your code, doesn't run the code, just reads the code. And you can do that in place. Some of them even have an IDE plugin that'll just scan your code as you're writing it. And then there's dynamic scans, which those are essentially bots that crawl your website or your forms or your REST endpoints and try to figure out what vulnerabilities you've exposed. And that treats your code base as a black box. It doesn't really know what it's built in. So those are the two kinds of security scans that are part of dev processes. But so I'm going to talk about a little bit about pipelines and then how to add security scanning processes to your pipelines. So pipelines, by that I mean basically CI tools. There's probably most of you are familiar with or have heard of Jenkins. That's pretty Java. The world uses a lot of Jenkins, but it'll work with anything. And there's just, I don't want to give you the tyranny of choice here, but there's so many of these types of pipeline tools that will run all these different automated steps. As soon as you commit to, or as soon as you push to your GitHub, it'll kick off all these steps that eventually, if you've got a really well-developed pipeline, you'll end up being deployed to your staging or even straight to prod. That's a bit of a pipe dream for most enterprises, but continuous delivery does actually happen. So there's a list of some. If you're on AWS, code pipeline's pretty nice because it integrates with all the AWS tools so easily. So basically using these pipelines, like a typical automated deployment process that's very straightforward and simple is going to be, you commit your code, the GitHub trigger compiles it. Most of these pipelines these days are spinning up a whole container, running all your tests in the compiling your code, running the test in the container, and then if all the tests succeed, that stage completes, and the next stage goes off. So this would be a very simple, and often a lot of the code pipelines people have are just like this. So run the code, compile it, test it, and deploy it somewhere. Usually, if you're deploying automatically, it'll go to QA or staging or something. So, and then you can build out a lot of, a more realistic enterprise type pipeline that you would see would have different environments. You might promote code across environments if each step works. You'll trigger remote acceptance tests and stuff like that. Maybe UI tests you'll stage somewhere and run a bunch of UI tests and make sure they work. So a lot of testing. And why are we testing all this stuff before we push? We want to make sure that our code is going to work the way we hope it will. And the more testing, the better. But you'll notice that there's no security scanning happening here. And the security scans are, in a way, like a set of tests. They're testing your code to see if you've introduced any vulnerabilities. And a lot of your unit tests won't really find that. So what a lot of organizations do is they'll have parallel process for scanning and testing your code with security scans. And then there might be a manual way of triaging those results. You might have a pause on your deploy, and you have to go check your scan results somewhere else, and then eyeball it and maybe try to figure out if you think it looks good or not. And they can get really complicated. So it would be a lot cleaner for you, and I have found, to incorporate those steps right in the middle of your pipeline. And that way you can be very sure that that one version of your code is the version that's had these scans run on it. And if those scans look good, you can feel much more confident about pushing your code all the way through. So, and why is it important to do it in the middle of the pipeline? Because a lot of companies, or a lot of teams, I should say, they'll have the git commit hooks. So as a developer, you have to set up your commit hooks, and the pipeline doesn't know if you've set up your commit hooks correctly. That's a human process that's outside the range of your automation. And so you're hoping that your humans have followed the process correctly, but that's the cause of a lot of heartache in software. So incorporating that straight into your pipeline so you can rely on having the pipeline run that test on the code that's a candidate to go somewhere, regardless of whether or not someone's already run it elsewhere, still adds peace of mind to your process. And secondly, there are a lot of scans that people are running on their code anyway as part of pipeline processes, usually like code linters or a cleanup that'll make sure your code's formatted correctly. And a lot of these scans, which are static, they can just be run really in that same way. It's just another step in your pipeline to spit out the results. So I'm going to give an example. Oh yeah, first let's talk about, for those of you who are using these scans or aren't that familiar with them, there's a couple big players in the commercial space. So the more enterprisey your organization is, the more likely you may know about these tools. So the big dynamic scan players are these three on top. Qualys, probably the biggest. And they all have APIs, so it's very easy to connect with your results or to trigger the scan straight through their API right there as part of your deployment process. And same for these static tools are cloud hosted, although Fortify is a little bit heavyweight. Java is more about Fortify. But Veracode and Burp Suite have these open APIs where you push your code straight there, get the results, download the report, and see if it looked good. So how would you use, but these all cost money. So here's a list of a few pretty cool Python-centric tools that you can add straight to your pipeline flow. The PyRCheck one actually is about making sure all of your code is type safe. And then a lot of these are doing static scans. Requires is pretty cool. It'll look at your requirements.txt file and see if there's anything in there that either is known to be vulnerable or should be upgraded and that kind of stuff. So with that in mind, this is to add to your pipeline the static scan, you really just throw in the next phase right after your unit tests and go. But you're not doing anything with that here. So what I like to do is I'll have an evaluation stage. So I get the report's finished, then I have some code that's going to evaluate that report. So let's say, and then the evaluation is going to be my own logic of what we think is an important enough threshold to turn off the pipeline. So let's say for this purpose, if there's any severe vulnerabilities, we're going to cancel the pipeline and call it a fail. That could be a very simple evaluation that we do of the static analysis output. So then we get to, voila, what I would consider an ideal pipeline that includes all these steps and includes dynamic scanning. So for dynamic scanning, once we get to the static analysis, we would also include post-processors, anything that takes that report output. Because remember, one of the pain points is that a lot of these parallel processes of the scans happen outside of your pipeline, and there's human and manual processes to even deal with those outputs. So if you put post-processors right there in your pipeline, you've scanned the code, the post-processor might add all the results to a dashboard for leadership visibility. It might push, like this company I'm with, Extant, it might take all the results and push them to your team's task tracker, and with explanations of what they did wrong, or explanations of what the vulnerabilities are. That's how I should put it. So then you do an evaluation of that. If that passes, you might go straight to a staging deploy, kick off your dynamic scan from Qualys via their API. You might have to listen and wait for that scan to be done so that you can go back to the API, pull down the results, run the post process on that, evaluate it, and then everything looks good and you deploy. So that's the really quick high-level summary of how I think you can really add a lot of value to your pipelines by including your security scans right there in the middle of it.